Have you been there, lying awake at night, replaying every conversation, dissecting every message, wondering what he meant, what you could have done differently, or why it feels like he's slipping away? Your heart feels heavy, your mind feels wired, and yet he seems fine, unbothered, moving on with ease, and you're left holding the emotional weight of something you can't even define. That's the trap of overthinking. It's seductive. It makes you feel like if you just analyze it a little more, maybe you'll unlock the answer, maybe you'll find closure, maybe he'll come back. But here's the truth no one wants to say out loud. Every moment you spend obsessing over him is a moment where you are no longer choosing you. Overthinking doesn't give you control, it takes it away. It doesn't solve the problem, it is the problem. And while you're stuck in your own mind trying to figure him out, he's already winning. Not because he's better, not because he's right, but because your energy is orbiting around him instead of being rooted in your own worth. This isn't about blame, it's about power. Your power. The power to refocus, detach, and reconnect with yourself. Because the more you get lost in him, the further you drift from you. And the moment you stop making him the center of your world, you finally remember he was never the prize. You are. When you're overthinking someone, what's really happening beneath the surface is you're abandoning your own emotional safety in the hope that understanding him will bring you peace. But it never does. Instead, you create a loop of thoughts that keep you stuck in the same emotional pattern, analyzing his every word, reinterpreting old moments, playing out what-ifs, and fantasizing about how things could have gone differently. That loop becomes your home, even though it's filled with anxiety. Why? Because it feels productive. It tricks you into thinking you're making progress, when in reality, you're standing still while your self-worth slowly erodes. The truth is, overthinking is often your mind's way of trying to gain control in a situation where you feel powerless. You're not overthinking because you're weak. You're overthinking because your heart cares deeply and doesn't know where else to channel that care. But here's the catch. When all that energy goes into him, you give him a power he hasn't earned and doesn't even know he holds. You make him the main character in a story that's supposed to be about you. Think about it. Every time you replay the last text conversation, trying to decode what a certain emoji meant, or why he took 2 hours to respond instead of 1, or why he was online but didn't reply, you're giving away pieces of your emotional clarity. You're not listening to your instincts anymore, you're just reacting to your fears. And that's when he's already winning. Not because he's doing something extraordinary, but because you're playing a game that you didn't agree to enter. A game where the scoreboard is measured by how long he takes to text, how warm or distant he feels that day, or how many stories he views. That game doesn't have a winner. It only has someone who gets lost. This is the point where you have to interrupt the pattern, because the most attractive magnetic energy you can bring into any dynamic is the energy of self-possession. That means you're not waiting for external validation. You're not handing your piece over to someone else's inconsistency, and you're not trying to mold yourself into the version you think he wants. You're grounded, you're calm, you're choosing yourself, even when it's hard. Now here's what most people won't tell you. He feels that shift. Maybe not right away, maybe not in a dramatic, cinematic moment, but slowly he begins to notice that something is different. You're not chasing anymore. You're not waiting on his breadcrumbs. You're not anxious for his attention. That calmness, that silence, that absence of neediness, that's when he starts to feel it. Because the person who used to orbit around him has become a universe of her own, and nothing unsettles someone more than realizing they've lost the comfort of your overgiving nature. Ironically, the less you try to get a reaction out of him, the more powerful your presence becomes. He doesn't miss the girl who begged for his time, he misses the girl who stopped needing it. He doesn't long for the one who overanalyzed everything, he longs for the one who finally stopped thinking about him. Because in your silence, he's forced to hear the echo of everything you used to give him. That's the part you have to remember. You don't need closure from him. You don't need an explanation. You don't need to keep thinking about what he's thinking. You only need to remember that your peace is more valuable than his potential. When you stop overthinking, you stop bleeding energy. And when you stop bleeding energy, you start radiating power. Not a loud, aggressive kind of power, but a calm, steady, grounded power that says, I know who I am, I know what I bring, and I won't spend another moment trying to prove my worth to someone who couldn't see it when it was right in front of him. So the next time your mind tries to take you back into that spiral, pause, take a breath, and remind yourself, if he's on your mind more than you're on his, it's time to flip the script, not to hurt him, not to get revenge, but to reclaim the part of you that forgot how enough you already are. When you prioritize his needs, his emotions, and his responses over your own well-being, you start to lose yourself in the process. It often begins subtly. You just want to be kind, understanding, or accommodating. You make little adjustments, cancel your plans because he asked last minute, silence your needs because you don't want to sound too much, or hold back your opinions because you don't want to push him away. On the surface, it seems like compromise, but over time, it becomes self-abandonment. And the longer you stay in that space, the easier it becomes for him to take you for granted. This is what overthinking often disguises itself as care. You tell yourself you're just being thoughtful, that you're trying to be considerate, that you're trying to make things work. But if you're honest, what you're really doing is twisting yourself into a version of you that you think he'll finally choose. And that version isn't rooted in your power, it's rooted in fear. Fear of losing him, fear of being alone, fear that maybe if you don't bend just enough, he'll walk. And ironically, the more you bend, the less he sees your value. The version of you that doesn't speak up, that waits by the phone, that watches his stories and wonders if he's thinking about you, that version is not the full expression of your power. She's a watered-down version of your truth. She's giving her heart to someone who's not meeting her at the same level. And here's the painful reality. The more you give in that state, the less he respects what you give. Because it's not anchored in boundaries. It's not coming from wholeness. It's coming from a place that says, if I love you hard enough, maybe you'll finally see me. But that mindset never wins him over. It only makes you smaller in your own eyes. Men aren't drawn to women who disappear into their orbit. They're drawn to women who have a life, a light, and a sense of self that doesn't dim in someone else's shadow. When you start putting him above your own peace, you teach him that your standards are flexible, that your energy is on sale, that your time and love come with no requirement for emotional maturity. And once that message is received, once he knows you'll always be there no matter how little he gives, you lose the leverage that healthy relationships are built on. Love doesn't require you to disappear. It requires you to be fully visible, fully present, fully expressed. But that kind of presence can only exist when you trust yourself more than you trust his potential. When your self-worth isn't on the line every time he goes quiet. When your value doesn't waver just because his attention does. That's the switch. That's when you stop overthinking and start showing up as someone who doesn't chase energy. She matches it. You don't need to scream, block him out, or play games to shift the dynamic. You just need to stop overfunctioning. Stop planning the next move. Stop rereading old texts. Stop strategizing your next message. Instead, come back to yourself. Ask yourself what you feel, what you need, what you truly desire, not in a fantasy, but in real life, and then act from that space. Because when your actions are rooted in self-respect, your energy changes. You walk differently, you talk differently, you stop negotiating your worth and start enforcing it. Here's the irony that no one talks about. The moment you stop overthinking him, that's when he starts thinking about you. Not because you manipulated anything, but because your absence is now louder than your presence used to be. Your silence becomes the thing he hears most. Your stillness becomes the contrast to the noise of every other person trying to win him over. And that contrast, it's unforgettable. The power isn't in how much you love him, it's in how deeply you love yourself in his presence. Can you still hold your standards? Can you still protect your peace? Can you still honor your intuition even when he makes you question it? That's where your energy becomes magnetic, not because you're trying to pull him in, but because you're standing so firmly in who you are, that if he doesn't rise to meet you, he'll always know he missed out on something rare. We often believe that the more we think about someone, the more control we'll have over the situation, that if we analyze their every word, their every gesture, and their every silence, we'll find the secret answer to how they feel about us. But here's the truth. Overthinking is not a superpower. It's a trap. And the more time and energy you spend replaying old conversations, decoding text messages, or trying to predict his next move, the more you remove yourself from your actual power, your presence. When you're constantly in your head, you're not in your life. You're not showing up for your passions, your friends, or your peace. You're stuck in a mental hamster wheel, hoping that if you just think hard enough, you'll somehow find relief. But thinking about him more doesn't bring clarity, it just drains your energy. And over time, that mental obsession becomes emotional starvation. You're feeding on crumbs of attention, stretching them out into stories that keep you hooked. You're waiting for something, a message, a sign, an apology that might never come. And even if it does, it rarely changes anything. Because deep down, you're not craving him. You're craving what his validation would make you feel about yourself. The cost of overthinking is that it keeps you locked in potential. You're not responding to the reality of who he is or how he's showing up. You're responding to who he could be if he changed. You're living in a version of the relationship that exists in your mind. But love doesn't live in fantasy. It lives in action, in consistency, in truth. And if you have to wonder every day where you stand with someone, then that's your answer. Clarity doesn't come from overanalyzing. It comes from observing what's real and honoring what you see. One of the most powerful things you can do is to step back and ask, what is this actually costing me? Because every moment spent dissecting his behavior is a moment not spent building your own joy, your own peace, your own self-worth. You become so focused on getting his attention that you forget to give yourself the attention you need. And when that happens, you shrink. Not because he made you small, but because you stopped choosing yourself in small daily ways. The irony is, the more you overthink someone, the more you disconnect from them emotionally. You start relating to the version of them in your head instead of the one who's actually showing up. You interpret every text with heightened emotion. You assume meaning where there might be none. You're no longer responding to what is, you're responding to your fears, your hopes, and your wounds. And in doing so, you stop listening, you stop seeing clearly, and you start chasing closure that can only come from within. There's a peace that comes when you stop needing answers, when you stop needing someone to behave a certain way so that you can feel okay. That peace is where your power begins. And that peace is not passive. It's active. It's a choice you make every day to come back to yourself, to say, I don't need to figure him out. I need to figure me out. What do I want? What do I deserve? What energy do I want in my life? And when you start asking those questions, everything shifts, because suddenly he's no longer the center of the story, you are. You don't need to cut him off in some dramatic moment. You don't need to post quotes about being unbothered. You just need to stop feeding the story. Stop rehearsing the pain. Stop replaying the moments you wish had gone differently. Instead, start reclaiming your time. Put your phone down. Take a breath. Choose to do something today that has nothing to do with him and everything to do with you. Go for a walk. Write. Create. Move. Do the things that remind you that your life is still yours. What breaks the cycle of overthinking isn't a text from him. It's a decision from you. A decision to no longer place your peace in someone else's hands. A decision to stop making someone else's behavior mean something about your worth. A decision to stop needing them to validate what you already know you are enough, with or without them. And when you truly embody that without needing to prove anything, that's when your energy becomes undeniable. Not because you were trying to get a reaction, but because you finally stopped needing one. When you break free from the loop of overthinking someone, you reclaim the energy they never truly earned in the first place. But there's something even more powerful that happens when you do that. You begin to radiate an energy that feels untouchable, not because you're trying to be aloof, not because you're playing a game, but because you've found something that most people are still searching for: inner stability. This is where the shift occurs, not in your circumstances, but in your spirit. You stop needing them to make you feel valuable. You stop auditioning for love. You stop trying to prove that you're good enough. And in that space, you become magnetic in a way that's completely effortless. There's a calm that lives inside people who are no longer trying to chase. It's in their voice, in their posture, in the way they speak and move. It's the energy of someone who doesn't need external permission to feel whole. And the reason that's so attractive is because it's rare. Most people walk through life in reaction mode, trying to control how others perceive them, clinging to attention or fearing abandonment. But when you stop overthinking someone, you exit that noise. You stop running in circles and start walking in your truth. You stop needing constant reassurance and start trusting your own instincts. You begin to live from a place of grounded self-worth. This isn't about becoming cold or detached. In fact, it's the opposite. It's about feeling everything, but not letting those feelings control you. It's about caring deeply while still knowing where to draw the line. It's the difference between someone who's emotionally present and someone who's emotionally dependent. When you're no longer obsessing over someone's behavior, you stop reacting to every dip or spike in their attention. You stop asking, why did he say that? Or what does this mean? And you start asking, is this connection actually nourishing me? That question changes everything. You don't need to be perfect to embody this kind of energy. You just need to be present. You need to remind yourself daily that peace is more important than proving a point, that clarity is more important than closure, and that not everyone who enters your life is meant to stay. But every experience teaches you something about what you truly value. The moment you stop overthinking someone is the moment you make room for yourself again. You start reconnecting with what excites you. You become curious about your own desires. You get honest about your boundaries. And suddenly, the version of you that was lost in confusion starts to dissolve, and a new version emerges. One who feels centered, calm, and in control. It's powerful because it shifts the dynamic without you having to say a word. You don't need to announce that you've moved on. You don't need to block him just to prove a point. Your silence becomes a statement. Your stillness becomes strength. Your distance becomes the reminder that your presence is a privilege, not a guarantee. People feel that. They feel when they've lost access to your emotional energy. They notice when the pull they once had over you no longer works. And that's when their curiosity begins to rise. That's when the power dynamic flips. But the irony is, by the time they realize it, you're no longer looking in their direction. This isn't about revenge. It's about realignment. It's about taking all the time and energy you once spent thinking about him and investing it into your glow-up, your internal one. Because it's not the new outfit or the filtered photo that really gets their attention. It's the unshakable energy of someone who no longer places their happiness in someone else's hands. That kind of confidence isn't loud. It doesn't need an audience. It's quiet. It's sacred. It's the moment when you realize that your peace isn't something you're willing to gamble anymore. And yes, they might notice, yes, they might come back, but by then you'll be different. You won't need their validation. You'll remember the version of yourself that used to overthink every detail, and you'll feel compassion for her, but you won't want to go back to being her. Because this new version of you, the one who chooses calm over chaos, who honors herself without needing permission, who knows that love should never come at the cost of peace, is the woman who can't be shaken. She's not performing, she's not pretending, she's just present. And that presence is what makes her unforgettable. There's a moment in every journey where the light starts to shift, not because anything external has changed, but because you've changed. The fifth key to breaking free from overthinking someone is reconnecting with your sense of purpose. Because when your world revolves around another person's attention, your emotional weather starts to depend on whether they texted you back, whether they noticed your story, whether they gave you the response you wanted. And when that becomes your main source of emotional stimulation, you slowly drift away from yourself, from your goals, from your passions, from the parts of your life that make you feel truly alive. This isn't just about distraction, it's about direction. Purpose gives you emotional structure. When your days are filled with meaning, your mind doesn't have the same amount of room to spiral over someone's mixed signals. That time you would have spent decoding their last message, it's now invested in something that actually grows you. That energy you were using to obsess over how they feel about you, it's now redirected into how you feel about your life. And that's what truly begins to shift your reality. Not waiting for their behavior to change, but anchoring into something deeper than their presence. When we're overthinking someone, it's usually because they've become the emotional centerpiece of our internal world. They occupy the space where our sense of joy, curiosity, and self-worth used to live. And without realizing it, we let them sit in the seat of influence. They determine our highs and lows. But purpose invites you to reclaim that seat. It calls you back to yourself, whether it's your career, a creative pursuit, your health, or a cause you believe in. Anything that stretches you into becoming more of who you really are becomes a form of emotional protection. Not because it hardens you, but because it fulfills you. There's something incredibly magnetic about someone who is lit up by their own life. Someone who walks into a room with a fire that no one else gave them and that no one can take away. When you're aligned with your purpose, you don't need to chase connection. You naturally attract people who are curious about the energy you're already radiating. You're not trying to prove your worth. You're living it. And the irony is, the very person who once had you spiraling in your thoughts starts to feel the shift. They feel that your attention has moved elsewhere. They sense that your emotional dependency is gone. And that is what often pulls their curiosity back in. But the beauty of purpose is that by the time they come back, you're not waiting. You're growing. You're moving. You're living in a state of progress that doesn't need their validation to feel complete. You're no longer trying to fill your life with their presence, you're filling your life with presence. There's a stillness in that, a quiet joy, a kind of power that isn't loud but steady. And that steadiness makes you feel safe inside your own skin again. When you're living with purpose, the things that used to consume you begin to lose their grip. You stop micromanaging every interaction. You stop writing emotional novels in your head about what their tone meant. You don't have time to build castles in the sky based on fantasy. You're too busy building a real foundation for yourself. Purpose doesn't mean you won't care. It doesn't mean you'll become robotic or indifferent. It means you'll have perspective. You'll remember that love is only one part of a full life, not the entire story. And that shift frees you. Because at the end of the day, your mind is going to focus on something. The question is, will it be someone who's inconsistent and uncertain, or something that makes you feel deeply aligned with who you're becoming? You don't need to have it all figured out to start reconnecting with your purpose. You just need to take one small step. Sign up for that class. Reignite that hobby. Reach out to that mentor. Start the thing you've been putting off. It doesn't matter how imperfectly you begin. What matters is that you begin. Because every moment spent moving toward your purpose is a moment spent moving away from overthinking someone who doesn't see your value clearly. And the beautiful irony is this: when you're truly immersed in a life that feels like your own, you stop trying to get someone else to notice you, and that's usually the moment they do. But by then, something in you will have changed. You'll no longer be waiting for them to choose you, because you'll have already chosen yourself. There's a kind of silence that speaks louder than any conversation. It's not the kind of silence that comes from indifference, but the kind that comes from peace, earned peace. When you stop overthinking someone who has been occupying too much of your mental real estate, you create that silence. And what makes this silence powerful is that it's not empty, it's full of self-respect. It says, I've said all I need to say, now I'm just going to live. That silence can become deafening to the person who once thrived on your attention. And this is where the sixth key comes in. Your calm detachment is often the loudest message you'll ever send. Overthinking creates noise, internal noise that eventually becomes external. You double text, you over-explain, you ask what's wrong, you send passive-aggressive stories into the ether hoping they'll notice. And at first it feels like you're trying to connect, trying to clarify, trying to fight for something that mattered. But over time, that noise becomes a kind of emotional overcompensation. It's what happens when we don't feel heard, so we raise the volume. But what you don't always realize is that volume isn't making you more powerful, it's making you more vulnerable. It exposes your imbalance. It shows how much they've thrown you off center, and people can sense that. When you finally stop overthinking them, not just on the surface, but at the level where you've truly let go, it changes everything. You stop initiating conversations that don't get reciprocated. You stop looking for clues in their behavior. You stop wondering if maybe this time they'll finally see your worth. That internal shift might seem small from the outside, but it has a massive impact, because now, instead of reacting, you're responding, and that nothing is an emptiness, it's presence. It's the presence of someone who's no longer waiting, no longer bending, no longer emotionally circling someone who hasn't earned their loyalty. What breaks the overthinking loop is not convincing yourself that they don't matter, it's realizing that your peace matters more. And peace doesn't beg, it doesn't perform, it doesn't prove. It simply is. It sits in the room with confidence, not arrogance. It doesn't need to be loud because it knows its value. That's the kind of energy that's unforgettable, because once someone has seen you distressed over them, frantic to gain clarity or closure, and then suddenly they feel you detached, they feel that void, not because you're trying to create one, but because they were used to filling your mental space, and now they're not welcome there anymore. Your absence becomes your power, not in a game-playing way, but in an energetically honest way. They know you care or cared. That's why your disinterest lands harder, because now you've withdrawn from a place where your investment used to be obvious, and people feel that loss, even if they never acknowledged your presence when it was constant. The thing is, detachment doesn't mean you're numb or cold. It means you're wise. You've realized that overthinking someone who doesn't think deeply about you is the fastest way to drain your own potential. This shift doesn't just affect them, it transforms you. Because with every moment you don't reach out, every time you don't check their page, every time you interrupt the spiral and redirect your energy back into your own life, you become stronger, more centered. You start to see just how much of yourself you gave away and how much of it you're reclaiming. You begin to fill your life with experiences that aren't filtered through their perception of you. You take back your voice, not by shouting, but by choosing silence that speaks volumes. Eventually they might notice, they might circle back, they might reach out and test the waters to see if the door is still open. But by that point, you're different. You're no longer that person who needed their attention to feel good about yourself. You've become someone who values peace so deeply, you're not willing to trade it for a temporary emotional high. And that, more than any reaction, explanation, or revenge, is what breaks them. Not because you intended to break them, but because they can feel the shift. They can sense that their access to you is no longer guaranteed. And for the first time, they're the one overthinking. This is what happens when you stop performing and start preserving. When you stop trying to win them back and start winning yourself back. Your silence isn't punishment, it's protection. It's the space where your self-worth gets to breathe again. And in that space, you realize that peace wasn't just the end goal, it was the message. The clearest message you ever sent without saying a single word. When you stop overthinking him, you stop feeding the very dynamic that gave him power over you. You stop giving your energy to someone who didn't earn the right to live rent-free in your mind. And in that stillness, in that return to yourself, you regain the one thing you were always meant to protect, your peace. This isn't about playing games or winning a silent war. It's about realizing that the most powerful shift happens when you choose clarity over confusion, self-worth over self-doubt, and presence over pursuit. He only wins if you stay stuck in the loop of trying to decode his behavior. But the moment you break that loop, the moment you pull your energy back and reinvest it in your own life, you become untouchable. You become magnetic, because nothing is more attractive than someone who doesn't chase validation, someone who is whole with or without it. That's when the power returns to you. That's when he feels the loss, not because you tried to make him, but because you finally stopped trying at all.